Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on cybercrime and human rights. Thanks so much for joining us. Today's webinar is co-organized by the United Nations Global Compact and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Before we get started, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Shiva Chandra, and I'm an advisor on human rights and legal and policy matters here at the UN Global Compact. I will be moderating today's session and will take us through the agenda for today's webinar. Next slide. Perfect. So first, I'll just be saying a few words about how cybercrime relates to the Global Compact's work, and then I'll turn it over to Peter Gastrow, who's a senior advisor at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Peter will introduce us to the work of the Global Initiative and also explain its focus on cybercrime. Next, we will hear from Troels Oerting, who is the head of the European Cybercrime Center, EC3 at Europol. Troels is a cybercrime expert and will provide us with an overview of what cybercrime is and to give us some context for today's discussion. We will then hear from Julio Téllez, a researcher of law and new technology at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, who will discuss the intersection between human rights and cybercrime. And finally, last but not least, we will hear from Samani, who is the Chief Technology Officer covering Europe, the Middle East, and Africa at McAfee. And Raj will provide us with the company's perspective on the topic of cybercrime. The final part of the webinar will consist of a question and answer session in which we encourage all participants on the line to ask questions to the panelists using the questions function on your GoToWebinar menu. And as you'll see in this next slide, you can ask questions where you see that A circle. And then if we do not respond, you can also raise your hand using that icon that's shown in B. And so this slide will also be at the beginning of the question and answer session in case you miss that here. But do feel free to send us questions, and while we will get through them at the end of the question and answer session. Also, if you have any technical questions, you can also use the same questions pane to ask us those questions, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Good. So just to get us started, with respect to the UN Global Compact, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with our work, we are the world's largest voluntary corporate sustainability initiative. We seek to align business operations and strategies with 10 universally accepted principles covering human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption, and to also catalyze action in support of broader UN goals. Of the 10 principles, the first two relate to human rights and are derived from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The first principle is that businesses should support and respect the protection of internationally proclaimed human rights. And the second principle is that business should make sure they are not complicit in human rights abuses. So with respect to cybercrime, the most relevant right here is the right to privacy. Our panelist, Julio, will be discussing this right during his presentation. So I'll just make a brief remark about it. But for those of you who may be unfamiliar with what that really means, this is the right that protects people against arbitrary, unreasonable, or unlawful interference with their privacy, family, home, or correspondence. And the state has a duty to protect the right of privacy of every citizen. However, businesses should also play a role in respecting this right and not infringing upon it or being complicit in human rights abuses. Particularly given modern day surveillance and the gathering of personal data, the topic of cybercrime is of growing importance. And so this is why we're really excited to be having this webinar today. And we have some fantastic speakers that will take us through cybercrime and what it is, how it relates to human rights, and good practices that companies may adopt to address cybercrime. And with that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Peter, who will provide us with an overview of what the Global Initiative is and its work on cybercrime. Peter, over to you.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm in Cape Town, and it's a privilege to share this webinar with the United Nations Global Compact. Next slides. The Global Initiative is really a network of prominent law enforcement, governance, and development experts who are dedicated to seeking new and innovative strategies to organize crime. Next slide. Its background was really a set of meetings, informal closed meetings that were held in New York during 2011 and 2012, where a group of senior law enforcement officials, experts, including cybercrime experts, met to discuss their concerns about the increased pace of transnational organized crime and the inability really to stem it properly. Participants felt that new ideas were necessary and called for the establishment of a network of experts. They felt that really creative, critical discussions were necessary, and such a network could be the forum through which new strategic and global approaches to counter transnational organized crime could be debated and discussed. Next slide. Those meetings were fascinating because they were not only law enforcement experts, they also consisted of development experts, some academics, some journalists. And they found that transnational organized crime and its impacts were not really well analyzed or understood, and that they were not systematically integrated into national plans or strategies. There was a feeling that existing forms of cooperation between law enforcement agencies, for example, tended to be bilateral, slow, and restricted to a limited number of like-minded states, and that therefore the degree of collaboration and cooperation between law enforcement agencies across the globe was far from what is necessary to effectively counter transnational organized crime. And there was a strong feeling that a more strategic and proactive global approach to counter transnational organized crime was required. So, as a result of these discussions, informal discussions in New York over a 2-year period, a network of experts was created which would promote such a debate, which would be inclusive, which would be operating through an independent and non-profit organization. It would serve, as it were, as an incubator for new integrated strategies to counter transnational organized crime. Next slide. So, following those discussions in 2011 and 2012, the Global Initiative launched itself formally in September last year in New York. By now, we have a network of experts from all the regions of the world, approximately 100 experts, independent individuals who participate in the Global Initiative in their personal capacity. They are also from human rights experts, governance, and, as I said, development issues. We are a non-profit organization registered in Geneva in Switzerland, and we focus really on 3 main issues, in addition to a number of smaller projects. These 3 main priority crimes that the Global Initiative focuses on are environmental crime. I don't need to expand on that. It's a major concern. Then cybercrime. And the third one is organized crime in zones of fragility and in conflict areas, mainly in those areas where governance issues are a serious problem. Next slide. Next slide, please. Coming to cybercrime. One of the reasons why the Global Initiative has identified cybercrime as one of its key priority areas is precisely because the experts that met during those 2 years advised that unless the avalanche of cybercrime is addressed effectively and with speed, it would be difficult to ever catch up. It was clear, we were told, that both in developed and developing countries, the capacity of government authorities and corporate entities was such that they were not coping with the increase in cybercrime. and that more effective strategies and more effective collaboration was necessary. The urgency of developing collaborative approaches towards addressing cybercrime is something which the Global Initiative felt it could assist with by providing platforms through which the urgency is illustrated and the information is made available, such as today's webinar. So this webinar is precisely in line with the objective of a global initiative to highlight the urgency of an aspect of transnational organized crime, to have critical discussions about it, to have open discussions about it, and to have discussions which then would lead further through informed opinion, assist in formulating responses. In short, those are the points which the Global Initiative wanted to stress, and we're very happy and very privileged and pleased to be part of this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter. We will now hear from Troels Oerting, who will take us through what cybercrime is. Troels, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. And also from my side, thank you very much for inviting me to this very, very important webinar. I'm a cop for 34 years, and for the first time, I guess, in my life, I'm a bit concerned. I'm concerned because I think that the world as I know it as a law enforcement officer combating organized international crime will change in a way that I will not be able to recognize what will be the end of this change. And I'll try to give you a short update on what will change for the police officers in the globe. First of all, I represent the European 28 member states of the EU. In the EU, we have 500 million people. We have 28 member states. We have 2.9 million police officers, and we are wired 78%. That means that everybody is online, and we also share a lot of information together. But we are not alone in the EU by being online. Globally, we are 2.7 billion people, not million, as you can see here at this slide, but billion. And the online users will increase in the couple of years, and we estimate that to be at least 4 billion in 2070. But we will not just change the number of people who are using the internet. We will also change the way that we actually use the internet. We will be online always, all of us, and we will also see the integration of the Internet of Things. That will mean that your car, your house, your fridge, you are always online. You will always be online, and there will be sensors all over. We will also see an increase in the internet trade. We estimate that at least the trade will surpass $1.5 trillion in 2017 with an increased speed. And now, what is the difference? The difference is that crime will also occur at the internet, and unfortunately, we already see loads of crime at the internet. But there is a difference here because we have always seen crime in the world, and there's always been people who want to conduct crime either because they want the profit or because they wanted other things. But the difference with the crime on the internet and in the physical world is that nobody travels. The police have always had a very good possibility to track and trace crime because there was a combination between the crime scene and the perpetrator. So if you had a criminal gang that wanted to sell drugs or to smuggle women for sexual purposes or other things, or they would like to rob or steal or rape, they need to be close to the scene of crime. But in cybercrime, they can operate from all over the world against all in the world. So suddenly the police, who's normally dimensioned to deal with the number of people in the country, faces much, much bigger number of criminals in theory. Next slide, please. So what do we do? In order to actually try to, in a systematic way, approach what we can do to help society combating crime at the internet, we have focused on 4 areas. First of all, is prevention. Prevention is extremely important here. It's always best to prevent than to cure. And I think that the education of our youngsters, but also the other part of the population, is very, very essential. Nobody right now in the EU get any kind of systematic education in schools, for instance, which leads them to try to discover the internet by learning by doing, and that's not a good way. Secondly, we need also to raise awareness and capacity building amongst police officers, but also prosecutors and judges. Then the protection side. I'm sure that Raj later will talk a bit about the protection side also, but that is about hardening the infrastructure, to build in security by design, to make sure that we do not allow applications to be widely distributed without some kind of, let's say a blue stamp that at least you can estimate that this is a good product. There also needs to be much more systematic processes and much more security of big data, and I will turn to this in a second. Unfortunately, we cannot just prevent and protect us out of crime. We cannot do this in the physical world, and we will not also be able to do this in the digital world. So we need to identify and hunt down the wolves. And there will be loads of wolves and packs around that wants to steal our information, our identity, our intelligence, and our money. The police need to identify those and to bring them to justice. This is, as I mentioned before, a very, very difficult task for law enforcement because we need to address criminals in another country and probably from countries we are not used to work with. And normally countries don't extradite their criminals, so it will be a difficult rendezvous with these criminals, but I'm sure that we will reach the goal. Last but not least, recovery. Because it's not a question of if I get hacked or if a government get hacked or if the big company get hacked. It is about when it will be hacked and what do we do to try to recover and to get on with life after a hack. And that is also something that we need to address. Then there is a overlying issue about attribution, internet governance. Who owns the internet? What should police have of the ability to identify criminals? And I think this is one of the big discussion points. For instance, we see now that really organized criminal gangsters use the hidden services like Tor to distribute child sexual abuse material, which is not the light version, but the very, very bad version where babies are getting raped and burned. We also see crime as a service. You can buy anything, and the police have no possibilities to identify the perpetrators. Will we accept this in a modern society? And if we will, what will be the trade-offs? This is something that we need also to discuss. Next slide, please. Then let's talk about big data. I'm a Danish police officer, and in my country, we share everything. I have 142 applications on my iPhone, and everything is online. It doesn't matter what it is, frequent flyer card, my medical information, my mails, what I search, my tax information, everything on my GPS. And this data will be stored now, not by one vendor, but by several ones. But still, if you have access to all of them, you are in big trouble. And I think that we need to also teach the population in the world to be more careful about who they share and what they share. Because these data is used by big companies, first of all, because they want to profile our behavior in order to serve us what we want. So they sell our information. So if you have a bank, the bank will know exactly what you buy, whom you buy with, and at what time of the year you do it. All these information can, of course, be used commercially. But also nation states are very interested in big data. They're used for manipulation and other things, and then, of course, organized crime. So I think the discussion about how we will try to prevent criminals and other ones to misuse big data is essential for all of us. Next slide, please. The last thing I will touch upon is this very, very interesting balance between an open and free internet on one side, and also a secure and safe internet on the other side. If you have full freedom and openness and transparency, there will be no security and safety. If you have full safety, there will be no freedom, and nobody wants that. I guess that we all share the view that we have a fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression. But I also think that most of us will share that there is also a fundamental right of not being victim of crime. And that is why we need to find a balance here. And in that, we need to entrust somebody on behalf of the society to have empowerment in order also to bypass privacy as we do in the physical world, to do this also in the digital world in order to create safety and security. This, of course, should be done by the democratic police, which is open, transparent, and can be controlled and should be controlled. If we fail here, I'm sure somebody else will deliver safety and security, and they will be out of reach on any form of democratic scrutiny. And I don't think that that's what we want. The internet is here to stay. The internet will be bigger and will include much more of our daily life. We need to take care of it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Troels, for a very interesting presentation. Before I turn it over to Julio Téllez, I just wanted to encourage everyone to send us questions using the questions pane. And just to remind you, we will be getting through those questions at the end of the presentation, so during that question and answer session. Great. All right, Julio, you are next. Julio will be discussing cybercrime and its relationship to human rights.
Greetings from Mexico. I hope that you are finding this webinar interesting. I want to thank the United Nations Global Compact and the Global Initiative for the invitation. Today, I will speak to you about cybersecurity and human rights. If we want to understand the threats and challenge for companies and individuals that cybercrime pose in the first 1 century, we need to understand the cybersecurity concept and its relation with the human right uses. Next slide. First of all, what is cybersecurity? According to the International Telecommunication Union, or ITU, and specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies, cybersecurity is the set of tools, policies, security concepts and safeguards, guidelines, risk management approach, actions training, best practice, assurance, and technology that are useful to protect the cyber environment, and of course, the organization and individuals. Assets that are used in the cyberspace in a nutshell. Cybersecurity attempts to use mechanisms which objectives are availability, integrity, and confidentiality, which protect all cyber users, resources, and these resources or assets include device, personnel, infrastructure, bearing in mind that for cybersecurity companies must be sheltered against cybercrime, application, service, telecommunication systems, and last but not least, the totality of transmitted and or stored information in the cyber environment. Next slide. The European Union, according to Catherine Ashton, the Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, has a cybersecurity strategy oriented in 3 principles: open, safe, and secure. In other words, it attempts to be inclusive and offer protection in all kinds of dangerous events in the cyberspace, unintentional and intentional. Next slide, please. Hence, we can set 5 priorities for cybersecurity in order for individuals and companies to be less vulnerable to any type of crime over the internet, as well as to be accountable in the human rights field. We need to have one premise for the cybersecurity. It needs to be grounded on freedom and openness. The laws that shield the cybernetic arena have to be in the physical world. International cooperation is imperative. Cybersecurity must be oriented to one main objective: the drastic reduction of cyber crimes. For this to be achieved, first, we have to know the criteria to measure the efficiency of the measures. And we need to develop special and exclusive industrial and technological resources for cybersecurity. Next slide. Talking about the company responsibility in terms of human rights, the last must be guaranteed to employees and customers. Their right to privacy over the cyberspace and the protection of their personal data needs to be a priority for all organizations. Next slide. As we have instruments to enforce cybersecurity, we have tools to guarantee human rights. The epitome of this is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In its article number 12, it mentions that no one shall be subject to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attack upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. The International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, for its part, in its article number 17, enshrines privacy based on the protection of law against any unlawful interference. The European Convention on Human Rights established one principle: there is need to be respect for private and family life. Next slide, please. A few weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal published an article that said that military contractors in the US are organizing to fight a new type of war, defending company against hackers. The defense company have one only fear. As the articles say, corporate clients are spoken by cyber attacks. With this in mind, I have a question to make. Is this party that we want to build in terms of cybersecurity? One of that rule of law in the internet depends on company that use or fear and money, and not one where the government develops an open, safe, and secure set of cyber policies. And second question, are these private companies going to constrain by the human rights principle? Next slide. Thank you. This is my email in case you want to contact me. I will be glad to hear from you. Thanks again.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Julio. Finally, we will hear from Raj Samani, who will be offering his perspective on the topic from McAfee.
Well, thank you. We've heard an awful lot about really the legal frameworks which offer us the right to privacy. I guess, we must feel pretty safe and warm that we have the legal frameworks which assure us of privacy. In fact, it's our legal right to have privacy. Well, if that's the case, why should we really be worried? We'll go to the next slide, please. It's remarkable when, actually, I just saw Troels' slides, and, Troels talks a lot about some of the risks, or really some of the actors behind cybercrime, or really those individuals or those actors behind, breaching our privacy. And, if I remember rightly, there were big companies, nation states, and organized criminal groups. But what I wanted to do now was just to say, well, we've heard a lot about the theory, but in reality, what's actually happening out there? This particular price list was actually derived from an Information Commissioner's Office report, and it cited the prices that were paid for personal data. If you had a desire or you had a need to go out and get personal data, for example, if I wanted to know your mobile telephone account, if I wanted to know who your friends and family were, or, if I wanted to even know your name and address, I can go and outsource that. I can go and do that. And incredibly, it was remarkably low tech. I mean, they didn't use computers. They used telephones by and large. And, they used to have entire call centers of individuals just reading from scripts to extract personal data. And in fact, the business was so profitable that one information broker alone earned £50,000 a month just from one client. And that was just for tracing addresses or address an employer at £35 or £55 at a time. So, when we talk about, I guess, breaching privacy, when we talk about, the ability for organizations to be able to access our personal data, this has been happening for a long time now. In fact, this report was actually published in 2006, and there's no indication to suggest that this entire industry has indeed stopped. So, there are multiple actors out there looking to extract personal data for financial gain, and unfortunately, we are the victims of that. Next slide, please. So, just 1 second. The other thing we also need to be consciously aware of, and I think, Troels touched on this earlier, was this concept of the Internet of Things. And I'm going to get into a slightly more detail, but, at McAfee, we publish a quarterly threat report. And that quarterly threat report looks to quantify the number of threats that we're seeing. For example, has the amount of malware increased, or have the number of malicious websites increased? And, broadly speaking, what we're seeing is more threats, both in terms of volume, but also in terms of breadth, which I'll come to in just a moment. But also in more places. I mean, I remember when I first started in this industry, and the only thing we were concerned about was a floppy disk, by and large, or a modem. And today, if we think about where these threats come through, I mean, it's not uncommon for any single person on this call to have received an invitation to click onto a link via a direct message on Twitter, for example, or receiving a fake LinkedIn request. I mean, they're coming in more places, but also more worryingly, they're becoming more personalized. And that in turn is partly due to the fact that most people share their entire lives online. I mean, I challenge anybody here to be able to sort of confirm with me that their digital tattoo, in other words, their digital representation of themselves, doesn't allow a criminal to be able to utilize that for a personalized attack. Next slide, please. So, the security threats, they are expanding, and in fact, we are making it considerably easier for cyber criminals or large businesses to do that. But I think the other thing that we also clearly need to recognize, and I know it was mentioned earlier, is also our attitudes towards privacy are adapting and are changing. And one of the sort of key demographics here are our own children. And I don't know about you, but I want to have a safer internet for my children to be able to work on. And sadly, we as digital immigrants have sort of understand the need for privacy because we've kind of, experienced the worst that, a non-private life has had. But, digital natives, perhaps not so much. And, unfortunately, there's too many examples of individuals who are posting things on social media accounts and then finding themselves closed out of jobs for later on. Next slide, please. But of course, I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. In fact, we can go to the next slide. We can move on from this one. These are just some statistics. So what does the future hold? Next slide, please. I'd love to be able to say it's really rosy and, things are going to get a lot easier and a lot better for us. But actually, that expanding surface or that attack surface is only going to increase. In the future, every single thing will be connected. Historically, we've always kind of had a demarcation between, consumer or enterprise or critical infrastructure. And, those particular silos were fairly sort of independent of one another. In the future, that's not going to happen. This particular diagram is taken from the NIST IR 7628, and it focuses specifically on the smart grid. And for those of you that know me, know that I published a book on this subject. And in particular, if you look on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see that on the customer's premises, you have consumer devices such as the electric vehicle, or the thermostat, or the appliance, being plugged into things like an entire grid, which has also substations which provides energy to all of us as well. So the need for security by design has never been more so important because, we're not just talking about, a piece of malware which may end up wiping your computer or, offer you a free photo of a half-naked tennis star and then infect your computer. What we're talking about here is a fully connected system. Everything is connected. Next slide, please. And from a privacy perspective, I think there are some significant issues and concerns associated with the Internet of Things. I'll stay on the smart grid, for example, just for now. But this is taken on the non-intrusive activity load monitoring. In other words, the ability to be able to monitor, the ability to be able to track every single electrical device in a consumer home. That is then reported back up to the utility, and then, as Troels said, he has 145 apps. I'd ask Troels, can you name me, of those 145 apps, just simply one app about with regards to what it does with his data? Where does it go? Who does it share it with? So when we start to consider the world of privacy in the world of tomorrow, specifically with regards to the Internet of Things, these devices, whether we're talking about wearables, whether we're talking about kettles or washing machines, they will track and they will monitor our usage. In some cases, with regards to medical equipment, they will also track, store, and report our medical conditioning. And my question to all of you is, where's that going to go? I mean, can any single person here today tell me, of all of the apps that you have on your device today, just tell me one app. What data does it collect? How does it submit it? Where does it send it? What do they do with the data? Who do they share the data with? I don't think anybody can. I think somebody did actually. So I've been proven incorrect on that, but I challenged them on that assertion. And now what we're talking about is the growth of those devices, the growth of the apps to, from the millions to the billions. Next slide, please. So, keeping safe online, of course, we need to teach people the basics, and there's a list of some of the things that they can do there. Next slide, please. But what I would suggest is, if you need or require more information, there are a series of links just available here. The UK Council for Child Internet Safety, associated with keeping children safe online, Site Advisor and McAfee Mobile Security, free software that we give away to consumers, UK Safer Internet Day, and the McAfee Advice Centre, and of course the obligatory Twitter handle as well. Thank you, and I will now hand over back to the organisers.
Great. Thank you so much, Raj, for that very interesting presentation. And I can say honestly that I don't even know what happens to the data that is on any of the applications I have on my phone. So that's a really great point. Great. So we're going to be starting our question and answer session right now. We received a few questions. They've come in through for Troels. So we'll just get started with those. And again, if you have any questions, if you can just go to the next slide. To again, just submit them using the questions pane, and we'll get to them during this question and answer session. So Troels, the first question for you is, how does Europol define cybercrime? And what are, I guess it's kind of a two-part question, and what are opportunities for the police to address, how can police better promote international cooperation?
Thank you. Good questions. Cybercrime, to define that, is actually not the most easy thing in the world because you have loads of definitions. And fighting cybercrime is also fighting crimes that can only be done in cyberspace. This is traditional, real cybercrime. But then you also have cyber-facilitated crime. It could, for instance, be child sexual abuse, which is rape of children in the physical world, but you use the internet either to live stream the abuse or to share the pictures. So in order for us to have a tight definition of cybercrime, we have used the Council of Europe's definition. And that is the Budapest Convention, basically, which is ratified by around 50 states. So we use this definition of cybercrime. And by that, we also exclude that in some countries, actually, if you hit another person in the head with a computer, it's also cybercrime because you use a computer to conduct the crime. And we have got away with this. So it's only things that is happening in cyberspace. How we can promote international cooperation, this is probably one of the biggest challenges we have right now. And the reason for that is that in the police, there is normally a need to know sharing policy. In cybercrime, luckily, there seems to be a need to share policy. So we get much more information and much more cooperation. But the problem is still that we do not get the proper reporting on what is going on at the internet. There's plenty of companies who never share any crime with the police and law enforcement. So what we try to do is, by using also the internet, we try to reach out. The webinar here is one of the things we do. We upload loads of YouTube movies, and we have many, many conferences also with our colleagues in Interpol in order to maximize the knowledge of why we need to cooperate. Because, as I said to you earlier in this seminar, the world as I know it is over. We will not see crime from our neighboring countries. We will see crime from all over the globe against all of us. We will see that the criminals can hide in cyberspace behind proxies and VPNs. They will see there will be a weak governance, so we might not even be able to create attribution. So we need to work in a different way, where we, first of all, secure privacy and human rights, and secondly, also make the internet a safe place. And that requires all the skills and all the dedication that we have. And it is not just a law enforcement or police task. That is why we reach out to UN, to the Global Initiative, to RACH companies, and to other ones, because we need to do this in combination. This is a shared resource, the internet. This is just like the big seas and the air that we breathe. This is a shared resource. We need to protect this, all of us. And that is why we need to talk much more and also to exchange much more. I hope this gives a flavor of the big problem we have, what we are actually trying to solve it.
Perfect. Thanks. Actually, we have a follow-up question for you. So you had mentioned child abuse, but is there another, maybe can you just give us some other examples of other types of cybercrime that you've encountered?
Yes, and of course I can. And Raj can also help me. But if we talk about what is called traditional cybercrime, then we have right now big problems with encryption of victims' computers, what is called the crypto lockers or ransomware. We also see bank trojans who actually steals your passport information to your internet banking. We see DDoS attacks. We see big botnets who are aimed at directing big attacks on computers. And you see hacking into your private mail, your private Skype, your private Facebook account, your Twitter account, engineering. And you also see an industry right now that loads of the applications that you download for your smartphone or your tablet is actually completely malware. And the only thing it contributes to is to steal your information and send it. So there is loads of crime. Then you also see other types of crime where big criminal groups, they, for instance, they buy a debit card on the internet, and then they hack the internet provider's call center. Then they change the debit card from being a debit card to be a credit card with unlimited withdrawal possibilities. And we've just seen a case where a criminal organization in 1 hour and 45 minutes stole $45 million in that way. And that is much easier money to get than to conduct a bank robbery where you probably need to conduct 100 bank robberies to have the 45 million. So there is many ways of stealing information. But basically, it's information you steal, it's identity you steal, and it's money you steal, and then it's social engineering in order to also blackmail people. So there is loads of crime on the internet, unfortunately, and there is so much crime that there is enough for everybody. And that is why we are working so closely together with the private security businesses, also with Interpol.
So Troels, if you don't mind, I'm gonna kind of come in here as well, and I kind of wanted to share with everybody some of the discussions that you and I have had, and in particular, you know, I guess that sort of number one issue, which is how do you define cybercrime? And you know, when we published our research paper last year on cybercrime as a cybercrime exposed, or really the cybercrime economies, what we're kind of witnessing now is an evolution of traditional crime. And I think you kind of touched on that just now. You know, let's take, for example, armed robberies. You know, the FBI reported a 23% decrease in armed robberies in 2011. And that's because people are migrating over to cyber means as a means to be able to make money. You know, recently we've seen examples where, you know, bank robbers are walking into banks, not with guns or knives, but actually walking in with, you know, keystroke loggers to try to infect or try to at least capture or conduct a cyber espionage campaign within banks themselves. And, you know, other examples, if we see things such as, you know, the sale of illicit drugs. Now, you know, there's no need for you to get in your car and drive to a very dangerous part of the world, actually about 10 minutes from my house, but there's no need to do that. All you simply need to do is go online, get some, you know, virtual currency and go and order it. So, you know, the same applies for guns, and, you know, there's even suggestions that you can go out and hire hitmen for the, you know, through cyber means. So, you know, I think cybercrime, if we use the term cybercrime incorrectly, people will automatically assume that we're talking about viruses or DDoS. But in reality, you know, what we're talking about an evolution of traditional crime to a much easier mechanism and a lower risk for the perpetrator.
Great, thanks, Raj. We have one question for Julio. Julio, the question is there a need for cyber justice? And how can the rule of law be used to address cybercrime?
Yes, it's a very interesting question. Well, the cyber justice is the use of technological instrument. Normally we talk about cyber crimes when the technology are object, and we had to take advantage of the technologies to fight the cyber crime, because we can see that the justice is very slow. It doesn't work fine. And we have to rejoin. We have to make effort to be together to fight this problem. the Budapest Convention or the Roman Statute is good advantages to try to organize all the nations. And it's interesting, for example, in the Microsoft have a digital crime unit in Redmond, Washington, and they fight all kind of crime, not only for protect the company, also to protect employees, also for protect his customers, and also for protect all people. So we have to be together against this fight. We cannot win this fight if we do the things easily. So cyber justice is very important. We have to reivindicate the justice, the law, and maybe we can do a better work for the next generation. Thank you.
Thanks, Julio. Actually, to follow up on a point you just made, Julio, I wanted to ask either Troels or Roger, both actually, if it's possible to achieve global collaboration to counter cybercrime, particularly when it affects national security and power rivalry between countries. And also, Julio, if you want to jump in on maybe some jurisdictional issues as well, you can do that.
Yes, for example, here in Mexico, the president is leading to fight against the cybercrime. So it's very important because it's the same president of the republic that is trying to do the things to try to do the things well. Excuse me. So yes, the cooperation is important, but we have to homologate the national laws, because if we don't have any common or standards rules, it's impossible to try to fight together with the same policy, with the same line, this problem. Thank you.
So, if I may, I'll try to answer that in a slightly different manner. I know that there's been a lot of focus around the jurisdictional issues, and whilst they're absolutely valid, we've got multiple examples of law enforcement operations where law enforcement across different geographies have worked and collaborated. Liberty Reserve would be the most, one of the most high-profile and recent ones. Dark Market, Operation Fish Fry. But I think, one of the great examples, or one of the other sort of key areas that we need to address, is this whole concern with regards to skills. I recently asked the question, and I said, if you're 18 to 20 years old and, you're absolutely one of the best at what you do, where would you want to work? Would you want to work in the public sector, or would you want to go to work in Silicon Valley, for an Intel or a Google or an Apple or a Facebook? And so, I don't want to get his head any bigger, but I really believe the work that's being done at the European Cybercrime Centre is a template for law enforcement across the globe to see not only how you can collaborate with other law enforcement agencies across the world, but also how you can develop a real public-private partnership to kind of address some of those issues. Because, there's no way that, one single law enforcement agency is going to have all of the technical skills required to address cybercrime. But by establishing a strong public-private partnership, you can address any of those deficiencies or actually address some of the new areas. So really, I would hold up the work that Troels and his team have done as a sort of as a blueprint for other law enforcement agencies across the world.
Great. Troels, do you want to comment on that, or should we?
Yeah, of course. I would like to thank Raj for his kind words, and I think that we have a good work and a good program, but we would also not be able to do this without our partners from the private sector. And Raj know very well that McAfee and his colleagues, plus in other companies, they also provide very, very big help to the European Cybercrime Center. And we help 28 countries, and basically the most rich countries in the world, I guess. And we have huge problems. So what we are trying to do is now to see some of this, the blueprint, that the way that we do, if we might be able to help other regions, South America through EUROPOL, or the African continent through AfricaPol or AsiaPol, to find ways that we can learn from each other and see if what we have tried to do in Europe, if that will also fly with some adjustments in other areas, because this is true global crime. And this is not just about getting it to work in Europe, but this is very much to get it to work globally. And that's also where the global initiative comes in, because this is something that we need to discuss in a broader context. But again, this shows, and the European Cybercrime Center is not alone here to share the limelight. We were not here if we didn't have advisors like Raj and like his colleagues, and also from academia and also from other areas. This is a collaboration of work. And I think that the good thing about it is also that I fear sometimes when I follow the news that there is a big, let's say, a lack of trust in governments after the Snowden revelations and what have you. And I think it's paramount and key for law enforcement that we have the trust of our citizens, because without the trust, we will not be empowered to get the information that we need to do our job. And that's also why I think it's so important that we do this work in an open and transparent way. Of course, not naive, that we will not tell the criminals how we do, but we will tell any parliamentary commission or judges or whatever how and what we do, and we will ask for permission to do it, and hopefully they will grant us the permission. And by doing so, I hope that we can regain some of the trust that seems to have been lost in the last year's time, which I am a bit frustrated over, because this will implicate and make our work much, much more difficult in the future. But I've not given up. I'm a born optimist, and with good friends around me, I think that we will also survive the internet, but it will be a rough ride, and there will be a number of years where we will have many tough decisions, and we will see much more crime that will affect more people and innocent people. It's always the innocent people and the weakest people in our society that will pay, because the rich, they will always be able to protect themselves. So I hope that this seminar will be followed by many others. I hope that we can share what we do at EC3 with others, and by doing so, that we can create a much safer and prosperous internet. Thank you.
That's perfect. Actually, it's a great segue to our last question. This question is for Peter, and it is: what efforts are being made to harmonize the fight against anti-cybercrime? Developing countries are lagging behind legislation and international cooperation.
This is a very difficult question, because the priority given to cybercrime really differs from country to country. I would imagine that the priority being given to cybercrime in a relatively poor developing country is far lower than it would be in a developed country, which is much more aware of the damage that's been caused. So there's no easy answer. As Troels has said, there's a tremendous task awaiting the global community to start making contact with those who wish to counter cybercrime across the world. This is not only law enforcement, although they have a primary role to play. It has to do with policymakers and ways in which public can be informed. The Global Initiative hopes to make a contribution in that regard. We see ourselves as a platform where this type of message can be conveyed to different parts of the world without it being colored or labeled from one political power or by the other. The major task that awaits us is precisely what the question elucidates. Let us get together to develop global countermeasures. And unless there's a start, such as in the cybercrime and some of the work which Troels and Raj are doing, it's going to be very difficult. The urgency is such that the wave will dump us and wash over us, I think, if we don't take it more seriously as an average citizen and as local organizations, corporate organizations. So I hope there's the orange light is flickering for us, and I hope that you can see it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. And I just wanted to add, just from the Global Compact, that collaboration, and really, particularly amongst businesses and public and private sector partnerships, is really what we support at the Global Compact, because we do really focus on both the respect of human rights, but also the support dimension. And collaboration, collective action, partnerships are all part of that support dimension. So we're really glad to hear that that's really already happening. And yeah, that's really wonderful. Before we close today, I just wanted to just provide a slide on some resources that are available. Just the Global Compact website on particularly our human rights page, and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. That website's also available. And the middle point is the Human Rights and Business Wellness Forum, which is an online platform that the Global Compact co-hosts with a consultancy in the UK named Maplecroft, with support of the GE Foundation. And that the forum has about 26 different dilemmas that multinational companies may face in emerging economies. And a couple of them are relevant to our discussion today, such as the right to privacy, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. So I do encourage everyone that is on the line to visit the website when you have a chance. It's free. It's open to all stakeholders to comment, to share insight and good practices. Great. And lastly, before we close, I wanted to thank our panelists for sharing their time and expertise. This was really a fantastic discussion, and also to the participants on the line for their great questions. I think it really opened. I think we discussed a lot, from the rule of law to what businesses can do, and how cybercrime affects both globally and locally, which is fantastic. And I also wanted to specifically thank Olivia Wagner at the Global Initiative, who was instrumental in organizing today's webinar. And yeah, lastly, a copy of today's presentation, both the slides and the recording, will be available on both of our websites. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to contact us. So wonderful. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day. Good night.